crisis. Obviously, he also hopes to reassert confidence in his leadership. Now, from the White House, the President of the United States.
Good evening. This is a special night for me. Exactly 3 years ago, on July 15th, 1976, I accepted the nomination of my party to run for President of the United States. I promised you a president who is not isolated from the people, who feels your pain and who shares your dreams, and who draws his strength and his wisdom from you. During the past 3 years, I've spoken to you on many occasions about national concerns: the energy crisis, reorganizing the government, our nation's economy, and issues of war, and especially peace. But over those years, the subjects of the speeches, the talks, and the press conferences have become increasingly narrow, focused more and more on what the isolated world of Washington thinks is important. Gradually, you've heard more and more about what the government thinks, or what the government should be doing, and less about our nation's hopes, our dreams, and our vision of the future. 10 days ago, I had planned to speak to you again about a very important subject: energy. For the 5th time, I would have described the urgency of the problem and laid out a series of legislative recommendations to the Congress. But as I was preparing to speak, I began to ask myself the same question that I now know has been troubling many of you. Why have we not been able to get together as a nation to resolve our serious energy problem? It's clear that the true problems of our nation are much deeper than gasoline lines or energy shortages, deeper even than inflation or recession. And I realize more than ever that as president, I need your help. So I decided to reach out and to listen to the voices of America. I invited to Camp David people from almost every segment of our society: business and labor, teachers and preachers, governors, mayors, and private citizens. And then I left Camp David to listen to other Americans, men and women like you. It has been an extraordinary 10 days. And I want to share with you what I've heard. First of all, I got a lot of personal advice. Let me quote a few of the typical comments that I wrote down. This from a Southern governor: Mr. President, you're not leading this nation. You're just managing the government. You don't see the people enough anymore. Some of your cabinet members don't seem loyal. There is not enough discipline among your disciples. Don't talk to us about politics or the mechanics of government, but about an understanding of our common good. Mr. President, we are in trouble. Talk to us about blood and sweat and tears. If you lead, Mr. President, we will follow. Many people talked about themselves and about the condition of our nation. This from a young woman in Pennsylvania: I feel so far from government. I feel like ordinary people are excluded from political power. And this from a young Chicano: some of us have suffered from recession all our lives. Some people have wasted energy, but others haven't had anything to waste. And this from a religious leader: No material shortage can touch the important things like God's love for us or our love for one another. And I like this one particularly from a black woman who happens to be the mayor of a small Mississippi town. The big shots are not the only ones who are important. Remember, you can't sell anything on Wall Street unless someone digs it up somewhere else first. This kind of summarized a lot of other statements. Mr. President, we are confronted with a moral and a spiritual crisis. Several of our discussions were on energy, and I have a notebook full of comments and advice. I'll read just a few. We can't go on consuming 40% more energy than we produce. When we import oil, we are also importing inflation plus unemployment. We've got to use what we have. The Middle East has only 5% of the world's energy, but the United States has 24%. And this is one of the most vivid statements. Our neck is stretched over the fence, and OPEC has a knife. There will be other cartels and other shortages. American wisdom and courage, right now, can set a path to follow in the future. This was a good one. Be bold, Mr. President. We may make mistakes, but we are ready to experiment. And this one from a labor leader got to the heart of it. The real issue is freedom. We must deal with the energy problem on a war footing. And the last that I'll read. When we enter the moral equivalent of war, Mr. President, don't issue us BB guns. These 10 days confirmed my belief in the decency and the strength and the wisdom of the American people. But it also bore out some of my long-standing concerns about our nation's underlying problems. I know, of course, being president, that government actions and legislation can be very important. That's why I've worked hard to put my campaign promises into law. And I have to admit, with just mixed success. But after listening to the American people, I have been reminded again that all the legislation in the world can't fix what's wrong with America. So I want to speak to you first tonight about a subject even more serious than energy or inflation. I want to talk to you right now about a fundamental threat to American democracy. I do not mean our political and civil liberties. They will endure. And I do not refer to the outward strength of America, a nation that is at peace tonight everywhere in the world, with unmatched economic power and military might. The threat is nearly invisible in ordinary ways. It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will. We can see this crisis in the growing doubt about the meaning of our own lives and in the loss of a unity of purpose for our nation. The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America. The confidence that we have always had as a people is not simply some romantic dream or a proverb in a dusty book that we read just on the 4th of July. It is the idea which founded our nation and has guided our development as a people. Confidence in the future has supported everything else. Public institutions and private enterprise, our own families, and the very Constitution of the United States. Confidence has defined our course and has served as a link between generations. We've always believed in something called progress. We've always had a faith that the days of our children would be better than our own. Our people are losing that faith, not only in government itself, but in the ability as citizens to serve as the ultimate rulers and shapers of our democracy. As a people, we know our past, and we are proud of it. Our progress has been part of a living history of America, even the world. We always believed that we were part of a great movement of humanity itself called democracy, involved in the search for freedom. And that belief has always strengthened us in our purpose. But just as we are losing our confidence in the future, we are also beginning to close the door on our past. In a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities, and our faith in God, too many of us now human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. We've learned that piling up material goods cannot fill the emptiness of lives which have no confidence or purpose. The symptoms of this crisis of the American spirit are all around us. For the first time in the history of our country, a majority of our people believe that the next 5 years will be worse than the past 5 years. 2/3 of our people do not even vote. The productivity of American workers is actually dropping. And the willingness of Americans to save for the future has fallen below that of all other people in the Western world. As you know, there is a growing disrespect for government and for churches and for schools, the news media, and other institutions. This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth, and it is a warning. These changes did not happen overnight. They've come upon us gradually over the last generation, years that were filled with shocks and tragedy. We were sure that ours was a nation of the ballot, not the bullet, until the murders of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, Jr. We were taught that our armies were always invincible and our causes were always just, only to suffer the agony of Vietnam. We respected the presidency as a place of honor until the shock of Watergate. We remember when the phrase "sound as a dollar" was an expression of absolute dependability, until 10 years of inflation began to shrink our dollar and our savings. We believed that our nation's resources were limitless until 1973, when we had to face a growing dependence on foreign oil. These wounds are still very deep. They have never been healed. Looking for a way out of this crisis, our people have turned to the federal government and found it isolated from the mainstream of our nation's life. Washington, D.C. has become an island. The gap between our citizens and our government has never been so wide. The people are looking for honest answers, not easy answers, clear leadership, not false claims and evasiveness and politics as usual. What you see too often in Washington and elsewhere around the country is a system of government that seems incapable of action. You see a Congress twisted and pulled in every direction by hundreds of well-financed and powerful special interests. You see every extreme position defended to the last vote, almost to the last breath, by one unyielding group or another. You often see a balanced and a fair approach that demands sacrifice, a little sacrifice from everyone, abandoned like an orphan, without support and without friends. Often you see paralysis and stagnation and drift. You don't like it, and neither do I. What can we do? First of all, we must face the truth, and then we can change our course. We simply must have faith in each other, faith in our ability to govern ourselves, and faith in the future of this nation. Restoring that faith and that confidence to America is now the most important task we face. It is a true challenge of this generation of Americans. One of the visitors to Camp David last week put it this way: we've got to stop crying and start sweating. Stop talking and start walking. Stop cursing and start praying. The strength we need will not come from the White House, but from every house in America. We know the strength of America. We are strong. We can regain our unity. We can regain our confidence. We are the heirs of generations who survived threats much more powerful and awesome than those that challenge us now. Our fathers and mothers were strong men and women who shaped a new society during the Great Depression, who fought world wars, and who carved out a new charter of peace for the world. We ourselves are the same Americans who just 10 years ago put a man on the moon. We are the generation that dedicated our society to the pursuit of human rights and equality. And we are the generation that will win the war on the energy problem, and in that process rebuild the unity and confidence of America. We are at a turning point in our history. There are two paths to choose. One is a path I've warned about tonight, the path that leads to fragmentation and self-interest. Down that road lies a mistaken idea of freedom, the right to grasp for ourselves some advantage over others. That path would be one of constant conflict between narrow interest, ending in chaos and immobility. It is a certain route to failure. All the traditions of our past, all the lessons of our heritage, all the promises of our future point to another path, the path of common purpose and the restoration of American values. That path leads to true freedom for our nation and ourselves. We can take the first steps down that path as we begin to solve our energy problem. Energy will be the immediate test of our ability to unite this nation and it can also be the standard around which we rally. On the battlefield of energy, we can win for our nation a new confidence, and we can seize control again of our common destiny. In little more than 2 decades, we've gone from a position of energy independence to one in which almost half the oil we use comes from foreign countries at prices that are going through the roof. Our excessive dependence on OPEC has already taken a tremendous toll on our economy and our people. This is the direct cause of the long lines which have made millions of you spend aggravating hours waiting for gasoline. It's a cause of the increased inflation and unemployment that we now face. This intolerable dependence on foreign oil threatens our economic independence and the very security of our nation. The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation. These are facts, and we simply must face them. What I have to say to you now about energy is simple and vitally important. Point 1, I am tonight setting a clear goal for the energy policy of the United States. Beginning this moment, this nation will never use more foreign oil than we did in 1977. Never. From now on, every new addition to our demand for energy will be met from our own production and our own conservation. The generation-long growth in our dependence on foreign oil will be stopped dead in its tracks right now, and then reversed as we move through the 1980s. For I am tonight setting the further goal of cutting our dependence on foreign oil by 1/2 by the end of the next decade, a saving of over 4.5 million barrels of imported oil per day. Point 2, to ensure that we meet these targets, I will use my presidential authority to set import quotas. I'm announcing tonight that for 1979 and 1980, I will forbid the entry into this country of 1 drop of foreign oil more than these goals allow. These quotas will ensure a reduction in imports even below the ambitious levels we set at the recent Tokyo summit. Point 3, to give us energy security, I am asking for the most massive peacetime commitment of funds and resources in our nation's history to develop America's own alternative sources of fuel, from coal, from oil shale, from plant products for gasohol, from unconventional gas, from the sun. I propose the creation of an energy security corporation to lead this effort to replace 2.5 million barrels of imported oil per day by 1990. The corporation will issue up to $5 billion in energy bonds. And I especially want them to be in small denominations so that average Americans can invest directly in America's energy security. Just as a similar synthetic rubber corporation helped us win World War II, so will we mobilize American determination and ability to win the energy war. Moreover, I will soon submit legislation to Congress calling for the creation of this nation's first solar bank, which will help us achieve the crucial goal of 20% of our energy coming from solar power by the year 2000. These efforts will cost money, a lot of money. And that is why Congress must enact the windfall profits tax without delay. It will be money well spent, unlike the billions of dollars that we ship to foreign countries to pay for foreign oil These funds will be paid by Americans to Americans. These funds will go to fight, not to increase, inflation and unemployment. Point 4, I'm asking Congress to mandate, to require as a matter of law, that our nation's utility companies cut their massive use of oil by 50% within the next decade and switch to other fuels, especially coal, our most abundant energy source. Point 5, to make absolutely certain that nothing stands in the way of achieving these goals, I will urge Congress to create an energy mobilization board which, like the War Production Board in World War II, will have the responsibility and authority to cut through the red tape, the delays, and the endless roadblocks to completing key energy projects. We will protect our environment. But when this nation critically needs a refinery or a pipeline, we will build it. Point 6, I'm proposing a bold conservation program to involve every state, county, and city, and every average American in our energy battle. This effort will permit you to build conservation into your homes and your lives at a cost you can afford. I ask Congress to give me authority for mandatory conservation and for standby gasoline rationing. To further conserve energy, I'm proposing tonight an extra $10 billion over the next decade to strengthen our public transportation systems. And I'm asking you, for your good and for your nation's security, to take no unnecessary trips, to use carpools or public transportation whenever you can, to park your car one extra day per week, to obey the speed limit, and to set your thermostats to save fuel. Every act of energy conservation like this is more than just common sense. I tell you, it is an act of patriotism. Our nation must be fair to the poorest among us. So we will increase aid to needy Americans to cope with rising energy prices. We often think of conservation only in terms of sacrifice. In fact, it is a most painless and immediate way of rebuilding our nation's strength. Every gallon of oil each one of us saves is a new form of production. It gives us more freedom, more confidence, that much more control over our own lives. So the solution of our energy crisis can also help us to conquer the crisis of the spirit in our country. It can rekindle our sense of unity, our confidence in the future, and give our nation and all of us individually a new sense of purpose. You know we can do it. We have the natural resources. We have more oil in our shale alone than several Saudi Arabias. We have more coal than any nation on earth. We have the world's highest level of technology. We have the most skilled workforce with innovative genius. And I firmly believe that we have the national will to win this war. I do not promise you that this struggle for freedom will be easy. I do not promise a quick way out of our nation's problems, when the truth is that the only way out is an all-out effort. What I do promise you is that I will lead our fight, and I will enforce fairness in our struggle, and I will ensure honesty, and above all, I will act. We can manage the short-term shortages more effectively, and we will. But there are no short-term solutions to our long-range problems. There is simply no way to avoid sacrifice. 12 hours from now, I will speak again in Kansas City. to expand and to explain further our energy program. Just as the search for solutions to our energy shortages has now led us to a new awareness of our nation's deeper problems, so our willingness to work for those solutions in energy can strengthen us to attack those deeper problems. I will continue to travel this country to hear the people of America. You can help me to develop a national agenda for the 1980s. I will listen, and I will act. We will act together. These were the promises I made 3 years ago, and I intend to keep them. Little by little, we can and we must rebuild our confidence. We can spend until we empty our treasuries, and we may summon all the wonders of science, but we can succeed only if we tap our greatest resources: America's people, America's values, and America's confidence. I have seen the strength of America in the inexhaustible resources of our people. In the days to come, let us renew that strength in the struggle for an energy-secure nation. In closing, let me say this. I will do my best, but I will not do it alone. Let your voice be heard. Whenever you have a chance, say something good about our country. With God's help and for the sake of our nation, it is time for us to join hands in America. Let us commit ourselves together to a rebirth of the American spirit, working together with our common faith. We cannot fail. Thank you and good night.
So the President has concluded his speech, and what a remarkable speech it was. It was almost a sermon. He mentioned a crisis of confidence, and he addressed himself to it. He has promised us more details on his energy program tomorrow, but he did mention quite a few specific proposals tonight. And our energy correspondent, Roger Peterson, who has listened to the President's speech, has even anticipated it. Roger?
Frank, the President's program as outlined tonight is extremely ambitious, and it's going to be more than a little difficult to pull off. Let's look at a few of the pros and cons of some of the major points.
The Energy Security Corporation to develop synthetic fuels. Pro. The loan and price guarantees envisioned by the President should spur development and cut our dependence on foreign oil. And much of the technology is already developed. Con. It will cost billions. To turn out 2.5 million barrels of synthetic crude a day, the government will spend an estimated $85 billion. 3 times what the Apollo project cost, the largest peacetime investment in history. The Energy Mobilization Board. Pro, a necessity if the red tape now necessary to build new plants can be cut away. It now takes 4 to 6 years just to open a coal mine. Con, the idea of the board could be shot down by Congress if it totally preempts local control. And how much red tape can be cut before the door is open to destruction of clean air and water standards? Conservation. Pro, it's the easiest and quickest way to cut back imports. New rules requiring public building thermostats set at 78 in summer, 65 in winter, could save 200,000 barrels a day. And the plan to have utilities lend money for energy saving should spur private cutbacks. Con, voluntary conservation plans have had little impact, and low-interest loans may not be enough incentive in themselves.
Thank you, Roger. Dan Kortz is our economics editor. He, too, has been listening to the President. Dan, what will the economists say about what the President said tonight?
Well, Frank, I think most economists would have preferred him to let the market help enforce conservation a little bit more, for example, by decontrolling the price of gasoline. That probably would have sent the price up to $1.25 or $1.50 a gallon. but it would have cut demand quite a bit, and it would have helped promote domestic production. Now, without that, he has to depend on synthetic fuels, which will take a long time to develop and may not do the whole trick. But unless he does something about reducing demand, then those import quotas that he's talking about are going to start to pinch a lot in a few years. Frank?
Well, Dan, what about the economic impact, specifically in terms of inflation?
Well, in the long run, obviously, it's to his benefit to put OPEC in a position where it can't keep raising prices the way it has. But in the short run, things like this synthetic fuel program are going to be very, very inflationary.
Thank you, Dan. The President gave his speech tonight knowing, as was said at Camp David the other day, that his ability to unify the country behind him is severely compromised by his very low standing in the polls. So, Sander Van Oker, now it's your turn. Did he help himself politically tonight?
Frank, I think not. The President made two speeches tonight. You said in the moment ago that one was a sermon. Then he proposed a plan of action. I think the President and his advisors are making a mistake if they think out there in the country that people feel there's a crisis of confidence in themselves. They feel there's a crisis of confidence in the President. And when the President said, the strength we need will not come from the White House, but from every home in the country, I'm not sure that's going to go down well with Democrats and voters in general, because I think what they're looking for is the President to tell them what to do. Adlai Stevenson said in Los Angeles in the '52 campaign, let's talk sense to the American people. Let's tell them there are no gains without pains. And had the President done that, I think he might have had a political plus tonight. But the sermon, I don't think that's going to sit well with the American people.
Thank you, Sandy. Well, this was Mr. Carter's fifth speech on energy, and it would be an understatement to say that Congress has been kind to his previous proposals. Many have been gutted, many ignored. Britt Hume is on Capitol Hill tonight with two influential members of the Congress, and let's find out now if they think Congress will take a different attitude toward the President now that he's made this speech. Britt?
Well, Frank, with me are Senator Wendell Ford of Kentucky, who is a Energy Subcommittee chairman here, and also Congressman Philip Sharp of Indiana, who belongs to both the key energy subcommittees of the House. First, Senator Ford, I'd like to ask you whether you think this speech was the speech the President needed to make in terms of leadership.
But I think he rose to the occasion tonight. I think he covered the gamut. I think he will get into greater detail. I'm very pleased with his speech tonight. He said some of the things that some of us have been saying for some time, that Washington is 72 acres surrounded by reality. I think he made the points tonight that should be made, the social and political fabric of this country, and I'm very pleased, and I think he made his points.
Congressman, what do you think about the sufficiency of the program that he outlined?
Well, I don't think there's any question he has set a very tough, immediate goals as well as long-range goals. He's called upon very strong and specific actions to produce our own resources and to put this country on an energy diet so that we're not so dependent on abroad. If you put that on top of all of the things that he and the Congress have been doing, I think it adds up to a very substantial move on energy.
Well, the linchpin of it all financially would seem to be the windfall profits tax. That's where most of the money is coming from. That has gone through the House, but Senator, do you think it's going to make it through the Senate now?
I think that the windfall profits tax will have some rough sledding in the Senate. I do believe that we will come with a windfall profits tax. I think we'll give the President what he wants, because then this country can have what it needs, and that will be the energy, and the government can take the lead and industry can operate it.
Thank you both very much. Frank?
And thank you, Britt, Senator, Congressman. Now I'd like to go to the man who has followed Jimmy Carter day and night since he was slogging through the snows of New Hampshire in 1976, our White House correspondent, Sam Donaldson. Sam, we know the President feels the country has lost confidence not only in him, but in itself, in our capacity to meet and solve our problems. We may not have to wait very long to find out if he has reversed that feeling or if he still holds it.
Well, tomorrow morning he's going to Kansas City and give details there. Tomorrow afternoon he's going to Detroit and talk before a labor group and answer questions. But, Frank, I want to talk about tonight. This was an extraordinary performance by this man. I mean, he gave it a heck of a shot. He may not have helped himself, as Sandy says, but he gave it a heck of a shot. He used gestures. He tried to sound forceful. At times he even shouted at us a little bit, but for a man who had always been soft-spoken so that we couldn't even hear him, it was somewhat of a welcome change. Never mind, Frank, that when he complained about Washington, he has been Washington for 2.5 years. Never mind that when he said that he was going to require utilities to switch from oil to coal, there would be a pollution problem, and maybe we don't want that. Tonight, I think he correctly identified the problem he wanted to address, himself. his leadership, the perception that he wasn't one, and I think he came to grips with that in a rhetorical style. Now, you're right. The substance of what he has to say is much more important. And you're right. The way it mixes in the country is something we have to hear from the country for. But I think I'm reminded of a line, Frank, in his book, Why Not the Best? And he said, you know, show me a good loser, and I think what we were seeing was a man who was saying that if you want me to leave the political scene, you're going to have to drag me off kicking and screaming because I'm not going to go quietly. It may not have played in Peoria, but I'd like to hear the results before we decide.
I think that would be an excellent idea, Sam, and thank you very much for your usual eloquence and forthrightness. Well, of course, besides the favorable reaction of the Congress, the President wanted to make an impression on the nation as a whole. That's one way to make an impression on the Congress. Last week, at the conclusion of his summit, he took an unexpected trip to the little town of Carnegie, Pennsylvania, to seek the advice of some citizens there. Mr. and Mrs. William Fisher spoke to him then. Well, tonight, the Fishers watched the President's speech in our New York studios with correspondent Richard Anderson.
Thank you, Frank. The Fishers are with us here now, and we sat here and watched the President's speech and paid attention to what he was saying. What did you think? Has he given an example for the country now? Are you more optimistic about from what you've heard?
I am.
I am too. I feel now we have. He's given us some direction where we can aim our efforts at, and I think he's really hit on the main problem in this country is the mood of the American people. You know, he explained that things are more serious than just how they appear on the surface, what you can see, that the problem goes much deeper.
Betty, is the public ready to make the kind of sacrifices the President is talking about?
I really feel that the American public is. I think everyone's just about reached their limit with this, and they realize now that we're going to have to do something. We are all going to have to sacrifice a little bit if we want to get our country turned around and headed in the right direction.
How about the meeting last Thursday night at your house? Did you hear any of the suggestions that were brought up in tonight's speech?
Oh, yeah. We talked about, well, the transportation. We talked about finding alternate ways to get oil, such as through the coal, the shell. And one thing that we really talked about was, well, what I was saying before about the spirit of the American people. A lot of people really sort of worry about what's going to happen tomorrow instead of looking forward like we used to. And I know that's how we feel. We just wonder where we're going to get the money to pay our bills. And I think a lot of people are really depressed, and our confidence has really decreased a lot. I can see it in a lot of people where I work, people in church. You just don't see people doing things the way they used to. It's just not like the American way.
Right.
But from what you've heard tonight, you're encouraged.
Well, I think that the President is really concerned with what's going on. And I think he'll be able to pull the people together. He's showing leadership, and he's showing a lot of concern for what's going on. And he's also shown that an average family, like ourselves, does have a voice in this government. And all it does is take the motivation to do it. No one can make you do it. You have to do it yourself.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Frank?
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Fisher. The members of the Smith and Buckley families were also at the same meeting, and Charles Gibson is with them tonight in Green Tree, Pennsylvania. Charlie, what was the reaction there?
Well, Frank, we can't tell you, as Sam mentioned, how it played in Peoria, but we can tell you a little bit how it played in Pittsburgh. These were two of the families that spoke with the Carters, John and Helen Buckley here, and Fred and Sue Smith. Fred, Sue tells me that you told the President in that meeting Thursday night to be bold. Was he tonight the way you envisioned?
Yeah, I thought he was a lot bolder than what he has been in the past. One of the things we told him was that he should be stronger, maybe a little more like Truman was when he was in office. And his answer was that...
give him hell is what you wanted.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. And I think he came across more that way myself.
You think so? It's funny, speaking of that Truman quote, in the middle of it, when you got into the energy suggestions, John Buckley turned to me and said, how the hell is he going to do it? Well, he outlined some steps. Do you think he told us how he's going to do it?
Yeah, he told us how he was going to do it, and I don't agree with him at all. Who is more qualified to look for oil than an oil company? I mean, you know, it's like going out and telling a steel company that you're going to walk in and tell them where to find iron. and no experience, no past experience. You're going to start a new government agency. We don't need that. We need free enterprise. We need oil companies being able to go out and look for new sources of oil or new sources of energy.
So you see this?
They have the buck. The oil companies have the knowledge. I think right now we have an oil company gets a 30% spot at finding oil wherever they dig. 30% chance of winning on an oil dig.
But let me see what your objection is. Your objection then is to more government, really, and that's what you thought he was saying.
He's walking in with a new agency. He's starting a new agency. And we're not just fighting fuel, we're fighting inflation. Inflation is on the other hand. And he's coming in with a new government, a new agency to add on to the agencies that we don't need already in the federal government.
Helen, do you think the people are willing to make the kind of sacrifices that the president talked about, that they're willing to join hands, as he said?
Well, I think to a certain degree, yes. I don't know in detail what he's planning to propose, and I would like to hear more about what he has to say about what...
But sacrifices you think people are willing to make?
I think so, in general, sure.
Okay, Frank, it played pretty well in Pittsburgh. Frank?
Some very interesting reactions there. Thank you, Charlie. The president indicated the other day that a successful speech on energy could be a marshalling point for the American people, similar in a way to John Kennedy's pledge to put an American on the moon. Well, his purpose tonight was to have us find our strength in our adversity. Are we willing to do what he says must be done to end our dependence on other countries for the energy we will undoubtedly need to keep our country going? So in a way, he was asking and answering the question, what kind of a people are we? Well, tomorrow morning in Kansas City, the president will deliver another speech, during which he's expected to spell out even more of the specifics of his new energy plan. The president will be talking to the National Association of Counties, and ABC News will carry that speech live. His appearance is scheduled for 11 a.m. Eastern Time.
This has been a special report from ABC News. We'll join our regularly scheduled programs after this from our local stations.
Monday, 30 all-time zanies make it a mad, 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 mad world.
Well, there's a mountain far away, and we go up there every day. We take the water from a living spring. It's a real clean taste that only Arrowhead can bring.
Arrowhead Mountain Spring Water. Share it in good health.
Speech reaction at 11.
Now I want to talk with some of our correspondents who have been following the president's speech very closely and who have been examining particular aspects of it. Dan Kortz is our economics editor, and I know that he's particularly interested in the inflation aspects of the president's remarks tonight and whether or not it's going to have an impact on the economy in the event that it is carried forward to fruition, and that the Congress provides the president with the appropriate authority and the pledges that he made tonight are actually adhered to. Dan, would you tell us again what you think this would be, what effect this would have on the economy? Are we going to have to pay higher prices for everything?
Well, certainly the price of energy is going to continue to rise in spite of the president's program. There's no concealing that fact. The attempt to get away from dependence on OPEC oil could have some fringe benefit down the road because it'll make it difficult for OPEC to keep raising prices every time it wants to. But the most immediate problem is going to be this enormous increase in spending, which he's estimated, or people are estimating, at $85 billion over the next 10 years. And a lot of private consultants believe the final number will run many times that. Now, that's the kind of money that won't produce any real product, but it'll pump a lot of money into the economy, and it's going to be very, very inflationary in the short run.
He maintains, of course, or at least his aides maintain, that that $85 billion figure will really come, most of it, from the windfall profits tax, and that it will be money that will be spent, as he said tonight, by Americans with other Americans, and that it won't be going abroad to enrich the coffers of the Arab sheikhs and so forth.
Well, that part's true.
Yes.
There's no question that it'll stay in this country, but it's still going to be coming out of the pockets of American consumers paid in the form of gasoline prices and then pumped into another program that won't produce anything, that doesn't produce any synthetic fuel for quite some time and doesn't produce any other kind of marketable product, and that's bound to be inflationary.
Roger Peterson, you're our energy correspondent. Were you struck by the fact that, so far as I could tell, there was really no mention of nuclear power in the President's address tonight?
Well, I think the President, Frank, has said something about he's going to address the nuclear question in a whole new framework, and I suppose try to answer some of those safety questions that have been hanging over everyone's head since 3 Mile Island. I think that there's going to be a move towards more nuclear power, but they want to make sure that it can be controlled before they try to develop it further.
Thanks, Roger. Let's go back up to Capitol Hill now, because, of course, much of this does depend on the Congress, whether the Congress, as Britt Hume put the question before, will actually enact the windfall profits tax, because there won't be any $85 billion to spend on all these various things if that doesn't happen. Britt, you still have your senator and congressman there. Suppose you expand on your conversation with them.
Well, Frank, I'm talking to, I think, a couple of quite satisfied Democrats here tonight. Senator Ford, you heard Senator Van Oker say earlier that you didn't think the president had made any friends politically tonight. You've got to run with Jimmy Carter next year. What do you think of that speech in political terms?
This was his best speech by far since he's been president. I think he rose to the occasion tonight. I think he gave those points that were necessary for the American people. I think he said those things that we've been hearing for a long time. I think in reality, he was saying to this country that we cannot control our destiny as long as we do not control our energy situation. I think he laid it out on the line, and I think Sam made a point. Now, at times, he was almost shouting at us, say, we will do these things. I think he talked about the social and the political fabric of this country. I think he put into about 35 minutes everything you could ask the man to put into it tonight. When he comes with details, I think Congress is going to respond to him, and above all, I think the American people will respond. I have no troubles with the speech tonight at all, Brett.
Now, Congressman, a great deal of this is already on the rails in Congress, isn't it?
Well, there's certainly a number of things. We've passed a synthetic fuels bill, which will clearly need to be reworked if we do it in the mode that the president is talking about. And we've passed the windfall profits tax, of course, in the House that he had originally recommended. We strengthened it in ways that he actually supports. So I think, you know, a number of things clearly are moving, but there's no question in my mind this speech is going to help carry that forward, because I think he really reached a lot of people on the most fundamental question of our country. And what's significant is he took action. That quota he put on that he says is going to start tonight on oil means that if we don't act, you and I are going to be in trouble. And so we're going to have to move.
There you have it, Frank.
Okay, Brett, thank you very much. And thank you, Senator and Congressman. I'd like to go back now to Senator Van Oker, who earlier expressed the opinion that the president may not have helped himself politically tonight by what I referred to, I must say, as a speech that was part sermon and part speech. And I think it was part sermon. Sandy, what is the basis for your feeling, really, that the American people just don't react to that sort of thing?
Well, you covered politics as long as I have, and the American people we know do not usually like politicians talking to them as if they were preachers. In Louisville, in Senator Ford's home state, last weekend, the Democratic governors who voted for an endorsement of President Carter's reelection were talking in terms of, they didn't want to do it really, but they did it. And they said tonight he'd have to do 3 things. He'd have to come out with solid proposals. Well, he's done that. Second, he'd have to have a wholesale shakeup in his administration. That may come. We don't know, but it wasn't in tonight's speech. And the third thing, which they emphasized more than the first 2, was he had to have an ability to communicate to the American people that he had the capacity for presidential leadership. And my instinct is that Americans are not going to respond too favorably to what I have to call, in a blunt way, an excess of perhaps soul-searching and hand-wringing in public from their chief executive. They may not like a president, but what they'd like to do is to respect the president, and they'd like to go to the president to tell them what it is they have to do. And to repeat again what I said before, when he said the strength we need will not come from the White House, but from every home in America, I think that people will say, well, that's not quite the way we see it. The strength's got to come from you. You wanted the job. No one forced you into it. That's just my feeling. Now we'll know when the next poll comes out.
Well, you know, Sandy, it's very interesting. I must say I have never, in my memory anyway, heard a president say the kind of things that Mr. Carter said tonight. For example, quoting a Southern governor who said to him, "You're not leading this nation, you're just managing the government. And some of your cabinet members do not seem loyal." There was a hint that we may have some changes before very long in the cabinet. And in, I suspect, the White House staff, too, although I rather imagine those are rather peripheral matters that do not necessarily have a big impact politically out in the country. We don't want to wait for the first poll on this speech, but I think we ought to go back right now to Roger Peterson, our energy correspondent. You have some further thoughts on the feasibility of all this? What about the synthetic fuels, Roger? Will that work?
Well, Frank, I think you have to realize just how large the scope of what the president is proposing. A commercial-sized plant for synthetic fuel, be it oil, shale, coal gasification, liquefaction, would produce the equivalent of about 50,000 barrels of oil a day. The president is talking about turning out 2.5 million barrels a day by 1990. That's just 10 years away. He's talking about building 50 of these plants around the country. He said earlier, "I need your help." He's going to need a lot of help to accomplish that.
It'd be very expensive, wouldn't it?
Well, they're talking $85 million, or $85 billion. Yes. And as Dan said earlier, there are some economists who say that's just the beginning.
Well, the president did tonight attempt to rally the nation. Many other presidents before him have tried to do that with varying degrees of success. Might be interesting to take a look now at some of those. I was going to suggest that we could see some other presidents issuing rallying cries to the country, but apparently we don't have it. I'd like to go back to Sam Donaldson. Now, Sam, Sam is not there either. We're having quite a bit of time here in our own situation. Sander Van Oker, you are still here, are you not, upstairs, one flight above me?
I'm here.
Okay.
And I do come from Peoria, and I don't know how it's going to play in Peoria.
Well, I wonder. You know, here he is, just a year or so, less than a year away from the first primaries, and he's using terms like stagnation and drift and so forth to describe his own administration. Now, will the country regard that as admirable candor or a confession of failure? I really don't know.
Frank, there's one thing that I think is difficult in this country. This country, for the past century, has been based upon the internal combustion engine. We've had a love affair with it. People have been told to move out to the suburbs, build shopping malls, get 2 cars, have second jobs. Now to conserve, I don't know.
Well, it is going to be very difficult and certainly very fascinating to watch. As I said before, we'll cover the president's speech tomorrow morning in Kansas City at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. This is Frank Reynolds in Washington, that island the president referred to tonight. For all of ABC News, good night.